Hello everyone, this isn't going to be a deep dive or an insightful analysis or anything. I'm pretty much thinking out loud here, talking to myself, and I just wanted to talk about Martin Scorsese a little and his films. The man is my favourite living filmmaker, maybe my favourite filmmaker of all time, and it has astounded me how the man has such longevity in his career. Even now, he talks about having more stories to tell, not being done with making movies. He is incredibly driven, is a patron of cinema, and amazingly keeps on top of everything that is happening with film. You look at other guys of his generation, and who really is there who still makes great films? There is literally no one from that new wave generation who is still up there. Some retire, some make obscure films that no one watches, others now make trash. There are directors who made better films than Scorsese during the 1970s new wave, like Coppola, but they fizzled away. And that's not to mention the other stuff Scorsese does, documentaries, TV series and whatnot. Even the advertisements he has made, like The Key to Reserva and The Audition, are full of fresh artistry. Steven Spielberg is up there, for sure. He's the only one that I can think of, but no one has matched Scorsese. If anything, Scorsese's newer films are more acclaimed and consistent than when he first hit the scene. It's kind of funny that a lot of fans, myself included, go on about how no matter how good Scorsese's films are now, his movies were better back in the day. But saying that, the quality of his films varied a lot more in the 70s than they do now. His highs may have been higher back then, but his lows were perhaps lower as well, whereas now, most of his movies are consistently great. And the fact that we are even having such discussions about whether an 80-year-old man's work is better now or way back when shows just how good the man's body of work is. In a career spanning more than 5 decades, he probably has at least one masterpiece per decade since the 70s. Scorsese did some interesting experimental work in the 60s, showed what he was capable of doing with Boxcar Bertha, but it was of course Mean Streets that he made his bones with. The gritty, raw and real Mean Streets. It was a deeply personal film for Scorsese that followed a small-time hood trying to keep the peace between his friends and his creditors, and trying to find some peace deep inside himself. It would be the template that laid the foundation for much of Scorsese's filmography, the juxtaposition of the deep-rooted connection to Catholicism, and with it Catholic guilt, combined with the gangster lifestyle, with it materialism, violence, greed and excess. I think a film director needs to choose his next project wisely after his breakout movie. All eyes are on him after all. People want to see if he's a one-hit wonder. And it's kind of funny that his next film was Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, a female-led, quirky road movie romantic comedy about a widowed housewife. It feels so unlike Scorsese, and yet this is something that we can say about many of his films, and like them, Alice is a fine picture. There's something about it that feels clean, fun, but still real and having the same raw energy that Mean Streets did. Apparently, Ellen Burstyn, who had complete creative control over the project, wanted a young up-and-coming director to helm the film, and when she met Scorsese and asked what he knew about women, he replied, "Nothing, but I'd like to learn." And his enthusiasm got him the job. It was a good showcase of him being able to go outside of his comfort zone, but it was his next film which really put him on the map, his first bona fide classic, Taxi Driver. Credit must be shared with Robert De Niro and especially Paul Schrader, who wrote the film, and really the movie was his baby. But together the three put together a landmark picture, a deeply intimate character study that really does justice to the cliche of being just as relevant today, especially today, what with us living in the age of mass communication, juxtaposed with mass loneliness and isolation. There's something about the likes of Taxi Driver, that gritty guerrilla feel, like The French Connection, that even Scorsese himself has never bettered. Taxi Driver was proof that this was a man to watch, but his next picture, New York, New York, was an utter disaster on so many levels. I mean, I don't remember much about this movie, but I remember liking it. The musical number at the end was really good, and it was cool seeing all this glitz and glamour in a film that still had that quintessential 70s grit, but the production was difficult. Scorsese stormed off set at one point. A fight scene between De Niro and Liza Minnelli got so out of hand that both of them and Scorsese ended up in the emergency room. Apparently, almost all the dialogue in the film was improvised, which made editing a narrative a nightmare. And most notably, Scorsese was on so much coke at the time. The film came out at the same time as Star Wars and tanked at the box office, which drove Scorsese to depression. And then comes a well-known story of Robert De Niro approaching a hospital bed-bound Scorsese close to death with a copy of the book Raging Bull, a biopic of Jake LaMotta, which Scorsese had no interest in making. Perhaps some of Scorsese's own frustrations and anger were bled into the project, but has such a furious, angry and rage-filled film been made which matches the fury of Raging Bull? An outstanding character study which sits nicely next to Taxi Driver, a film where the paranoia, jealousy and anger that destroys LaMotta's family life are the same qualities which garnered him success in The Ring. Who would have thought that Scorsese thought the film would have been his last Hollywood picture, and he'd go out with a bang thinking his American career was over after this? Instead, the movie cemented Scorsese's reputation as one of the most important filmmakers of the time. Still though, Scorsese had a weird decade in the 80s. This was a time where the Hollywood studios were tightening their grip on the industry again after the new wave, Cimino's Heaven's Gate and all of that, and I think it shows in Scorsese's output in this decade. The King of Comedy holds a special place in Scorsese's filmography. This underrated black comedy, a sister to Taxi Driver and a mother to Todd Phillips' Joker movie, was apparently so unsettling to make because of the embarrassing, bitter nature of the script that it was partly why he and De Niro didn't work with each other again for about 7 years. But it's masterful in what it achieves, the second-hand embarrassment, the awkwardness, the cringe, but never going the easy route and becoming farcical and over the top. Rupert is a very real character, a scary character, someone who many of us will know, or maybe even be if we're honest with ourselves, who hasn't had delusions of grandeur, imagining themselves rubbing shoulders with A-list celebrities, who hasn't thought, what do they have that I don't? It's a bit sad that Scorsese said he probably shouldn't have made the film, but I'm guessing that was in reference to the film's box office numbers, which was another disaster. And so, Scorsese's next two projects, After Hours and The Color of Money, the latter being the only sequel he ever directed, a sequel to The Hustler, do have that feel of him being a studio hire. I don't even know if After Hours was or wasn't, but it shows that even with paycheck studio movies where he can't flex his artistic muscles to the fullest, Scorsese is still great to watch, as both these movies are fun, well-made pictures. After Hours retains and racks up the anxiety that King of Comedy gave us, whilst Color of Money is a good fun film with Tom Cruise and Paul Newman in great form. Still though, these flicks do fall into the "why exactly did Scorsese make these films" category. You hear a lot about Scorsese trying to get projects off the ground in the 80s, whilst making his mainstream studio pictures to better his reputation with the studios. His Christ movie being one that he tried to make for ages and eventually did so. But it was Goodfellas that cemented Scorsese as one of the great directors. Even at this time, forget about 30 years later, directors from Scorsese's generation were falling behind and struggling to find their feet in a changing industry. Scorsese, on the other hand, was on fire in the 90s, especially the first half. Goodfellas is the ultimate Scorsese film, one where everything that makes him comes together. All the different tropes and traits, whether it be long sweeping tracking shots, mob violence, studies of dark characters, Catholic guilt, rise and falls, redemptions and punishments, you name it, Goodfellas is peak Scorsese and the best representation of the man's filmmaking. As he said when he read the novel Wise Guys, which the film is based on, "I've been waiting for this book my entire life." And who said Scorsese can only make gangster movies? Look at Cape Fear. What could have been a forgettable commercial thriller about a sadistic villain going after a traditional family was turned on its head by Scorsese. The villain has a point, the family is dysfunctional, and the style of the film is so over the top it feels like Hitchcock on steroids. Scorsese swapped rapists and blood and guts for 19th century high society with his romantic drama The Age of Innocence, a departure for Scorsese, but a film that showed his seemingly endless range as a filmmaker. And the speed in which these films were coming out was impressive too. Goodfellas was 1990, Cape Fear was 91, Age of Innocence was 93, and Casino 95. Casino, as expansive, wild and excessive as it is, feels like it would take years to make, and yet Scorsese managed a steady film every 2 years for a huge portion of his life. Casino is really one of my favourite films. It feels like Scorsese indulging, saying to us, "Oh, you like my last mob picture? Well, just this once, just for you, I'll go back with that cast and crew and do something in that world again." and in spite of Scorsese's reputation as a mob film director, it's the only time he really did this. And everything is cranked up in Casino, the violence especially. There's many ways to answer the critique that it was just Goodfellas 2.0, but one thing I want to say regarding that is, who cares? Goodfellas was a masterpiece. Even if Casino was a carbon copy, why would that make it a bad film? It's mind-boggling. Casino would be considered most other directors' magnum opus, their very best picture, but with Scorsese, many consider it a middle-of-the-park film for him. The Life of the Dalai Lama is a strange film for Scorsese to follow Casino up with. It marks one of two occasions in his filmography where a film with debauchery and immorality is followed up by a spiritual film. Even so, this movie contains what I think is the most disturbing scene in a Scorsese movie, as I talk about in another video. Bringing Out the Dead was a return to the nighttime street scene of NYC, a cold, harsh shoot, another collaboration with Strader, a nihilistic film but a hopeful one, and though good, it never reaches the heights of peak Scorsese. Perhaps Scorsese himself was in a dark place as his mother died in '97. The noughties was an interesting decade for Scorsese. These films have a strange place in his filmography for me. I mean, they are all good movies. Sure, there could have been improvements. Gangs of New York is a film I wish Scorsese could do over, or at least release that legendary director's cut that we do know actually exists. I love Gangs of New York, but it isn't really a sweeping, majestic epic, an insight into the changing of times and the violent birth of modern America, whatever it thinks it is. Really, it's a pulpy B-movie, Looney Tunes for adults with an A-list cast, including Daniel Day-Lewis giving a stunning performance, which the entire film revolves around. But Scorsese had issues with producer Harvey Weinstein on set. He was forced into casting Cameron Diaz, who wasn't great, and the same goes for Leonardo DiCaprio, the first collaboration with Scorsese of many. It's a messy film, one that can't decide if it's about an epic love triangle or the history of the New York gangs and the riots of the Civil War draft. And that's partly because director and producer clashed over the vision of the film. But I like it. I like being in that world. It's not the most sophisticated Scorsese film, but I'm chuffed it exists. The Aviator was solid. It probably deserves a rewatch for me, seeing as though I had no idea who Hughes was when I first watched it. So this biopic of a film director became a biopic of an entrepreneur aviator, which became a study of a man with severe OCD. It kind of moved from there to there to there to there, and I imagine it's difficult to get a structured narrative out of Hughes' life. I never really liked The Departed. The script felt wonky to me. The movie felt ordinary. It felt like a standard Hollywood thriller with a bit of Scorsese flavour, and his Oscar win for the movie was definitely more of a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's a genre piece, as is Scorsese's next film, Shutter Island. Now this is a film I really like. It's so entertaining. I loved the Mario Bava-esque colours of the film. The story was engaging and fun to rewatch. At the same time though, one could argue a lot of directors could have made this movie, like David Fincher. Did it really need the best director alive to helm what is ultimately a pulpy thriller? And I think this points to an issue I have with Scorsese's films in the 2000s. They're all good. It's probably Scorsese's most consistent decade. He was very much a top-tier Hollywood filmmaker, and his movies were making buck at the box office with Leonardo DiCaprio. But there's something about these pictures that just feel empty. It feels like Scorsese could have made films like The Departed and Shutter Island in his sleep. And sure, that's fine. Let the guy relax. He doesn't need to be making the stress-inducing films of the 70s which landed him in hospital. But it felt like another 80s decade for Scorsese. One where it feels like he's making all these polished big-budget studio films that all feel the same, just having a bit of fun while staying in the studio's good books. Of course, that's doing the movies a disservice, but there was always something about these movies, back when they first came out, that I felt, yeah, that was good, but he could do so much better. Maybe it's the casting of DiCaprio as the protagonist in 4 films in a row which give the movies a same kind of feel. But there's something about them that feels like Scorsese was on autopilot. But what are these movies about? What are they saying? What themes are they exploring? Not much, relative to Scorsese's earlier work. I've got a soft spot for Hugo, Scorsese's first children's movie, and his only 3D film. It was actually a disguised love letter to cinema and old Hollywood. It was charming, and Scorsese must have had fun making a movie about a filmmaker making movies. It made reference to Scorsese's passion for film preservation and restoration, and maybe it reawoken something in him, because his next picture, The Wolf of Wall Street, is a fine return to form, in the sense that here is a film that is about something, as would be Scorsese's next few movies. Initially, I was lukewarm to The Wolf of Wall Street, but it grew on me. It's a wild film, one that makes use of so many narrative techniques, like archive footage, advertisements, flashbacks, breaking the fourth wall, seeing what's in characters' heads, even cartoons. I read somewhere that Scorsese directed the film in anger, in the sense that he was critiquing a society that allowed a person like Jordan Belfort to exist and thrive in, and on top of that, as the ending implies, there's other wolves waiting in the wings who want to be just like him. I love that the movie works on both levels, a sex, drugs and rock and roll comedy, that's the textual level. Then there's the examination of capitalism, materialism, individualism, etc. That's the subtext. And Scorsese's subsequent movies might not be as quote-unquote entertaining as his output in the 2000s, but they are better films, in that they are more thought-provoking, they have more to say. Scorsese put aside the debauchery and shamelessness of Wolf and finally made Silence, his religious film where the protagonist battles for his life but also battles with his own faith. Then there's The Irishman, an answer to the criticism that he glorifies the life of gangsters. Here's a film that does something a little different, that allows the gangsters to live their lives to their elderly years, where their bodies slow down, where they reflect on their lives, contemplate on what they've done, and look to the future and what lies beyond. Which brings us to Killers of the Flower Moon, yet to be released at the time of the making of this video, but even if it is terrible, by all accounts it is not, at least it is about something, just like The Irishman was, just like Wolf was, just like Silence was. It will have something to say on the nature of genocide, of murder, of dehumanization, and I look forward to it. So what are your thoughts on Scorsese? What are your favourite films of his? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.